Hey everyone, this is a video I've been wanting to put together for quite a while now. It's a compilation of creepypastas that have been submitted to me by subscribers of mine. I've had these stored away in my email for quite some time and finally got a good group of them to put together. These aren't stories that I handpicked for any particular reason, and most of them I will be reading for the very first time as I narrate them. This is kind of just a thank you to my subscribers and a way to show appreciation to those that took their time to write and submit me stories. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy 10 subscriber-submitted creepypastas. Dark Waters by V. Mugen. Slaughtered that name, I'm sure. Anyway. My name is Derek Scott. I am 21 years old, and I used to live next to a lake that was mostly covered by trees, making the waters dark. It was a rural area, but I lived with a friend of mine. His name was Joe Hankson. He's 35, and we were friends for 5 years and mostly lived off of fishing in this lake, sharing our catches. We met in the closest town about 14 miles away. I lived with my mother until she just disappeared, and they took her home and all of her money she saved for me. My mother told me that my father was a scientist and one day had to go on a business trip and never returned with no trace of him again. And I was too young to remember. After my mother disappeared, I was basically homeless until Joe found me and offered me a home. He told me that he was a fisher for the town and made a decent amount of money off of it because animals weren't common around the area, because the animals that were raised mostly died from something. This meant fishing and farming was the main food source. We went fishing a lot every day, actually. He was like my second father. He got a serious look all the time, but I know he's actually humorous at times. Now, I live in California, not too far away from a lake, which I still have a connection to. Joe still keeps in touch with me, but he lives in Florida with his family. We moved from the lake because we had an experience that still keeps me up at night. I have a connection with the lake, not because I like it, but because it scared me, and I can't stop thinking about it. When I was first moving into my new house, I found old pictures of the lake we lived in, and I can now remember everything that made us move. Every single detail, and with those pictures, was a claw. An old claw that looks like some fossil from a dinosaur. But this claw didn't come from some dinosaur, or any creature you'd expect to see in a necklace. Let me explain to you why I still look at the lake and get chills down my spine as I hear the splashes in the water caused by fishes, with a memory that scarred me from those many years ago, detail by detail, as if I can see it happening on a TV. I woke up in pitch black from some noise that came from the shack that we kept our fishing supplies in. After realizing that there was footsteps outside, I thought it was someone trying to steal our gear to sell or something. Once I was fully awake, I got up and grabbed the gun next to my nightstand. I was struggling to switch on the lights, but it wasn't working, and I thought to myself that this idiot cut off my power. So I had to feel my way around to the front door. I unlocked my door and ran over to the shack, which had a light coming from it. I got to the entrance and shouted with anger, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Then I realized it was Joe trying to lift the boat. Joe dropped the boat and jumped and then said, "I'm trying to prepare for fishing since you take forever to do this in the morning. I woke up early to move it into the water." He was angry and told me, "Put the gun down. I'm not going to steal your share for fish, okay?" I realized I still had the gun up to his head and lowered it. He told me, "Since you're up, can you help me? This boat will get on the water faster if we get this over with." I helped him with the boat, and then went back to my house to change clothes. When I got home, I realized my lights still weren't working, so I went around to check the fuse box, and it was covered in water. Then I saw my kitchen window was open and wet as well. I called Joe over, and he said that it was messed up. I noticed that I was missing some food that I had. He gave me a lantern I could hang on the ceiling for light, and just guessed it was some teen playing around with us. After we were prepared, we started to fish. 5 hours of fishing, and we didn't get anything. We didn't understand why this was happening and gave up. After we pulled on shore, Joe looked angry and asked me, "Can you do me a favor and pull up the boat? I want to take a walk." I nodded, and he started walking into the forest close to the lake. Right when he was about to enter the forest, I saw him fall, and I ran over to see what happened. When I got there, he said he tripped over something and pointed to where he fell over. I went to look and saw a piece of wood covered in dirt. I wiped off the dirt to uncover a latch with a lock on it that looked very old. Joe ran over and saw it as well, and then said, When the hell was this here?" He looked at me and asked, "Did you know anything about this?" And I nodded no. After years of fishing there, we never saw this, and we made a deal to just forget it. After we discovered this latch, we just left it alone and did nothing about it, and just went home to play some chess. Of course he beats me. I swear he would be a champion if his passion wasn't fishing. After 3 rounds, I admit loss and then went home to sleep. I woke up again in the middle of the night, but Joe was trying to wake me up. He told me to follow him, and he took me to the back of his house, and I was horrified at the sight of Joe's fuse box covered with scratch marks and water. Then he pointed out there was blood on the grass, and we followed it to the latch, which looked like it had never been touched. We argued for an explanation. Then Joe said, "Maybe the answer is whatever that latch leads to." I looked at him and said, "What? Do you really think that entering wherever this latch leads to is gonna give us a reason why these scratch marks are being left with water?" I tried to tell him that maybe the same teenage tried to do the same thing with your fuse box, but struggled to open it and used a knife. He opened it, poured the water, and probably cut himself by accident in the process and ran to the forest. He kept telling me to get the gun and shoot the lock. After 5 minutes of arguing, I gave up and ran to get my gun and loaded it. We shot the lock, which managed to get the latch open. It revealed a dark cave that was pitch black and small. Joe told me to get his bag and a flashlight from his house on the kitchen table. I ran over to his house and noticed the sun was rising and admired it. But then I realized Joe's fridge was scratched and pretty wet, but I tried to ignore it. After I got them, he told me to take the bag, turned on the flashlight, and entered the cave. After several minutes of crawling through the dark, tight, empty cave, we realized the floor was wet and smelled like fish. We kept crawling and found an opening, which was nice after the uncomfortable position we were in for several minutes. We walked through it and found something strange. There was a pile of fish out of the water, just lying there and rotting. Then this horrid smell came, which we didn't smell until we found this pile of fish. We went further, trying to ignore the pile of fish, and found this door. Joe tried to open it, but something was blocking the door. Joe pushed harder and managed to get it open. We saw a messy room full of papers, pictures, and food wrappers everywhere. We found a lantern that Joe lit to get more light into this room. After looking around the room, we saw another door and opened it. Joe screamed in terror, and I came over and saw a skeleton with clothes and an arm missing. I jumped to the sight of this and just stood there. Joe finally told me, "Search the body and see if there's anything in the pockets." I felt around and took out a wallet which held some money and a picture. It was old, but it was a picture of a female, which I took a closer look at. Then I realized that this was my mother's picture. It had letters on it that said, "Your true lover," with my mom's name on it. Then I looked at the skeleton again, and I realized this was my father. We looked around the room and went through papers and books. After a few papers, I found a sketch with a piece of paper. The sketch was of this type of creature that looks like some lizard, and the paper was about a mutation of a fish that turned it into some type of monster. We went through more papers and found more of it with blurred pictures of it, and more about this mutation. We were scared, but then we heard fast footsteps getting louder and louder. Joe grabbed me and ran outside as the footsteps got louder, and along with those footsteps were growls. We found a small opening and went inside it to hide. We heard sniffs and footsteps coming to us, and I looked over to Joe and saw that he didn't have his flashlight, and I didn't have the lantern. The footsteps slowed, but were very close to us. My heart was beating fast, and the footsteps were getting closer. Thump, thump, thump. Then it stopped, where it was close to us. Then I saw something that stopped my heart. I saw white eyes with a black pupil, and it stared at us, staying frozen. I was ready to scream, but I couldn't, and we just stood there. I could not describe my terror. I was in genuine shock, but this proved to be helpful. This thing looked away and started to move, which I guess it just didn't see us. I looked over to Joe, and he looked as terrified as me, and he just then realized that he left the flashlight back at the room. He told me, "Wait here. I'm going to run back to the room and get the flashlight, and we will get the hell out of here before whatever the hell that thing is comes back." I stood there in silence for what felt like hours, but were minutes. Then I heard a scream. I knew it was Joe, and I tried to look out, but I froze at that moment, and I heard footsteps coming towards me. I heard grunts and growls, and thought that Joe died, and it was coming for me next. I started to pray to God for a miracle, and felt tears coming down my face, getting ready to accept my death. The footsteps sounded like they were 10 meters away, then 9, 7, 4, and I thought to myself, I was just counting away the time to my death, and when it was just outside, Joe jumped in the opening and covered my mouth. I saw that thing run by, grunting, and counted the steps it took until it was safe to assume that it was far. Joe took his hand off my mouth and lied back. I realized that he'd got scratched, and he told me to get the first aid supplies out of his bag to treat his wound. He was struggling to breathe because he ran and whispered, "I couldn't get the flashlight. I was just running, and I saw that thing and just froze." We knew we couldn't just stay there and wait for our death, so we ran and tried to retrace our steps with no source of light. We tried to run without making a noise, and we found the tight space, but then we heard the growls along with footsteps, and Joe told me to crawl faster. We were crawling, and we didn't recognize anything, but we heard movement approaching us. We were crawling as fast as we could until we saw a light, and we were relieved but interrupted with the footsteps growing louder and faster. We got out and closed the latch and tried to block it. The latch just kept banging, and this thing was growling until it just stopped, and we heard footsteps descending. We ran back to our houses and started to pack to get out of there. I grabbed my gun and a flashlight in hand. When I was almost done, I heard the water splashing outside, and I looked out to see something rising out of the water. I ran outside and tried to shoot it, but the gun wasn't loaded. And when I looked up, I saw that this thing was human, that was mixed with a fish, but bigger than a regular human. And I was so terrified, I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Just then, Joe was behind me, and he took the gun and loaded it with the ammo. Then he shot it right next to my ears, which started to ring, but it did nothing to the creature. The thing went back into the water. It was quiet for a moment. Then we saw more movement. Joe tried to shoot it, but it just kept moving. The sun didn't help us with finding that thing in the water, and it was too dark. The thing came out again on the ground. Then the creature roared, and we saw its teeth, which were huge, and it started to run at us. Joe tried to shoot it, but missed one and realized he was out of ammo. He dropped the gun and started to run, and I ran with him. We were running, and I was terrified, but then I saw Joe was pulling out the lighter and a cloth, which he lit the cloth on fire. It looked like it was damped in alcohol because Joe does drink sometimes, and he threw it at the creature and it stopped. It tried to claw us with its hand and missed. The claw broke off of its hand, and then the creature fell and cried in pain. I took the claw to examine it further and put it in my pocket. After a few minutes, it stopped struggling and gave up. I saw something on the creature's neck. I realized that the creature was wearing the same necklace that my mother wore before she disappeared. I got close to it, and I realized it was still alive. I said, "Mother, is that really you?" It grunted softly and closed its eyes. I cried for several minutes, then Joe walked over to me and tried to calm me down. I was hysterical and I couldn't say any words. I felt so much pain realizing we killed my mother. Many years from that, which is now, I did more research and I found out my dad was abusive and attacked my mother a lot because he was fired from his job as a scientist. He was trying to mutate a fish with a human, but he used a human which he kidnapped. The law didn't punish him because the judge was a good friend of my father's, but he still was stressed out over losing his job, but he went obsessed over his research. He hated my mother so much, and she was abused, but my mother refused to leave him. He went insane and started to continue his research. My mother realized that she had to leave him when he attempted to use me as his test subject and mutate me into this creature. She told the whole town, and they kicked him out with nowhere to go. My family told me everything, and they never approved of the abusive behavior of my father. After he left, he continued his research and kept sending letters threatening my mother's family, and they kidnapped my cousin and my mother. When he successfully mutated someone, it backfired and killed him. They never told me this because they didn't want me to know what my father managed to do to me. They recovered some of his research after I reported the cave and attack to the authorities. And when they recovered the research and notes, they found out that he had actually done something to me. They told me that I was going to mutate in 38 days. Endless Alone by Rob KSN. I was 12 years old by the time I first met my Aunt Amy. She was my dad's sister, the only connection I had left to him since he died at the hands of pirates when I was 7. That's another story, one too long to tell and far less interesting than it sounds. I'd hear my ma talking about her when I was younger. She would barely ever mention Aunt Amy to me. But after Dad had left our lives, I heard her speaking on the phone to her mother, her voice growing quiet whenever she'd mention our mysterious relative. I'd built up a picture of her in my head from the little things I had heard. She lived alone, I knew that much, and she sounded like a very unhappy woman. That, or happy in a way which people couldn't quite understand. I imagined her to be old, wearing high-necked, black dresses with messy red hair, and a stern but wistful expression on her face, like a Victorian goth. She lived out in a big country house, all alone, miles from where we were, She'd never been married or had children. Her money was inherited, so she didn't work. My dad could have taken the money, but he met my ma and opted for a comfy job in the city, which quickly turned into a life traveling between continents as he rose in the company and met clients worldwide. It was after a trip in China, which he had never returned from, that we were forced to assume he'd left us for another family. No contact, no last goodbye, not even an official divorce. We were devastated. We only found out the truth 5 years later, less than a month after my grandma's death. I thought Ma's heart would break all over again, hearing the torture his seafaring kidnappers had put him through for a few grand on the foreign black market. But she seemed oddly calm. Sad, of course, but at peace about it. He hadn't left us after all. It was at his memorial service that I met my Aunt Amy. I say memorial, not funeral, as it was literally held half a decade after his death had occurred. I can't remember how we actually found out what happened to him. Probably because I was young at the time, and it was likely a dull but tragic series of legal investigations which my ma had never chosen to tell me, so I don't know. The memorial was beautiful, if low-key. We planted a rowan tree for him, and a few of his high school friends and old colleagues turned up, as well as the group of cyclists he'd regularly gone out with on weekends all those years ago. The only relative of his there was her, Amy. I hadn't realized until then that she was my father's younger sister, only in her early 30s, not old at all, with dirty blonde hair and the same dark eyes as he had. She was dressed in a linen skirt and an ugly lilac jersey, obviously not the gothic garb I'd pictured her in, although it still seemed a surprise to me for some reason. My ma didn't speak to her, but I did. "Shame about Dad," I said. Stupid thing to say, I was so awkward. She smiled, clearly in the same position as me. "Yes," she responded eventually. Her voice surprised me. It was strong, yet quiet. Her accent was received and sweet, but something about the way she said it filled me with a sinking sadness I'd never experienced before. It was only one word. "It's a lovely tree," she said, and pointed. I looked at the young rowan, a 4-foot-tall baby with pale pink berries. "Yeah," I replied, "it's nice." My voice was quieter than I had meant for it to be. I remember so little of our conversation other than that. They were words I could have shared with anybody but her. She made me feel so strange and sad inside, like she'd seen such tragic things that her soul couldn't recover. Things far worse than the knowledge that her brother had died. It was the first and last time I would ever see her. I was 34 when Amy passed away, the same age I'd learned she'd been when we met. It wasn't until then that I'd fully grasped she was my only connection to Dad's family. No relatives other than me to speak of. I, of course, realized this when, at her funeral, I was named the executor and left with everything she'd had. The money, of which there was still a lot, the house, which I'd heard was beautiful, these were mine on the odd condition that I had a family. This was declared as vaguely in her will as I'm saying it here. Nothing to specify if she had meant a partner or an heir, or something else entirely. At 34, I was still single and childless, mostly down to busy time spent working and a lack of interest in the local dating pool. I lived in a student-populated part of the city. It was hard to meet anybody out who wasn't a 19-year-old partygoer, and I was never one for online dating. I imagined I might meet someone when I moved out to the house. A new life in a new town would surely mean new opportunities. I'd be able to quit my job with all the money my aunt had left me, and I was looking forward to free time and fresh horizons. I didn't know much about the place I'd be moving to, except that it was in the country. Probably a shocking difference from the city life I was used to, but I'd have plenty of time to grow accustomed to it. My mom might have been more wary about the situation than I was. She was the kind of person to pay attention to things like cryptic terms and conditions, and unusually generous gifts from distant relatives. Not that there was any reason to suspect foul play from Aunt Amy. I just remember my ma always saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Looking back, I think she spent most of her life disappointed, in a way which allowed her to be gracious, if that makes sense. I imagine she would have advised me not to take the house, if she'd still been with us. However, I had only my own interests to consider, as well as my future family's, if I was to follow Amy's rules, and so I scheduled to move into the house within the month. I must almost be there. My sat-nav wasn't taking kindly to the remote country lanes. Apparently, I was driving through a field and had been for the last half hour. I'd been imagining that it would pick up a road eventually, but quickly began losing hope of that. A sign up ahead pointed me towards Mortiford. That must be it coming up. I turned off just before reaching the village. The instructions I'd been given to reach the house are less an address than directions. The lane felt like there was nothing out there, just hedges and hedges and hedges and the odd bunny. And then I saw it. On a hill in the distance. It's huge. Less a house than a mansion. I gazed up in awe, struggling to focus on the road as my new home laid ahead of me. Eventually I came to the driveway, several hundred meters of shingle planted with a border of young apple trees, all stately homelike. I pulled up at the end of it, parking in front of a stretch of stables. My rattly old Saab must have looked ridiculous in front of this place. The front door, tall, skinny, and dark green, stood shiny and welcoming at the top of a short flight of stone steps. Everything was left to me, a house fully furnished and all, and I felt little need to take my flat-pack IKEA furniture with me from my cramped city apartment, so there was no removal van to wait for, just the 2 suitcases of clothes and junk that lay on my back seat. Keys in hand and bags in tow, I stepped up to the door and for the first time, entered my house. Radiant light from the floor-length windows, high ceilings, and carpeted staircases. It was the dream home. Taking a quick tour around, I was quickly in love. The kitchen was low-ceilinged, timber beams above it concealing the mezzanine pantry. In the living room was a generous fireplace, leather and Chanel sofas, a shag rug, and oak coffee table. Nothing was very new. It couldn't have been redone since at least a decade ago, but there was nothing archaic or antiquated about it. Too good to be true would seem like a fitting statement, but it was impossible to find anything malicious about the place. It was the perfect home to have a family in, room for my partner and I to entertain, plenty of hidden corridors and closets for our child to go exploring. I had some fun myself, uncovering this little hexagonal turret library that was hidden in the corner of the 3rd floor, or discovering the crawl space that led me from the wardrobe in one nursery to below the window seat of another. The only thing disconcerting about the place was something I discovered in the upper floors, the lack of furniture. It occurred to me, as I pondered the matter, that a single woman living out here alone wouldn't really need to furnish every room, yet it still felt strange. The nurseries, bedrooms, and bathrooms had no furnishings or decoration to speak of, other than Amy's old room on the 3rd story. It was by no means the smallest bedroom in the house, but humble in comparison to the balconied master room in the floor below. Her belongings were still here, as they'd been before she died. It was something almost creepy, but mostly nostalgic, an imprint of human life, of my own family, in an otherwise empty home. I sifted through the wardrobe to see what she had left. No sign of the hideous sweater I'd met her in, although that was unsurprising, decades had passed. Her clothing was mostly floral dresses or plain blouses with linen, skirts, and mum jeans. She had a couple pairs of comfy shoes on the floor, and a single leather messenger bag with what appeared to be a diary in it. Curious, I reached into the bag to examine the small moleskin book. Flipping through the dated pages, there appeared to be very little written in it. The odd doctor's appointment, but no birthdays or social events recorded. I knew she had no family, but now realized she'd had no friends either. It was the kind of diary for organizing dates, not recording personal matters, so I accepted that I'd learn a little about her from it and put it back in the bag. I'd take most of these clothes to a charity shop later when I went to check out the local town and buy some groceries. There wasn't much else of interest in her bedroom. A small mirror hung on the door of the wardrobe facing the bed. I didn't like being able to see mirrors when I was in bed. Childhood paranoia, so I moved it onto the desk. The desk itself housed a couple of ballpoint pens, envelopes but no stamps, and simple makeup items. Leading from the bedroom was an ensuite bathroom, with a porcelain bathtub but no shower hose. A white painted cupboard held a couple of blue towels and spare bed linen, as well as an entire shelf of soap and shampoo bottles, and spare loo roll. Above the sink was a classic bathroom mirror, one which opened to a small cupboard. Not much in there: aspirin, bandages, a prescription bottle of medication for insomnia. Nothing heavy, just melatonin. The bathroom was more decorated than any other room upstairs. There was a single painting hung on the wall, a framed print of Monet's poppies, and above the window was a simple white curtain. It was this, actually, which drew my attention to the lack of curtains in the bedroom. Not that this would be a problem, as the nearest neighbors I could see from my window were 3 fields away. It was peacefully remote, and I relished in the fact that I could be alone, but not lonely. I had craved this kind of silence and tranquility after my city life. These wide green views to the horizon, and the sounds of only birdsong and breeze were something of a dream. I unpacked my larger suitcase, hanging a couple of shirts and a summer jacket next to Aunt Amy's dresses. My clothes seemed shabby in such a grand home. This was the kind of place where I ought to be wearing a smoking jacket. I made my way back downstairs to the kitchen, where I made a plan of action for the next day. The garden looked huge and exciting, if a little overgrown, so I made a note to take a look around and perhaps cut the grass and replant some flower beds with all of my new free time. The pantry above the kitchen was filled with non-perishables, bags of lentils, rice, and wheat, amongst canned and dried vegetables, with the odd alien-looking potato or saggy shallot here and there. I added picking up groceries to my to-do list. There were a lot of small farms nearby, and I was looking forward to hopefully finding a local farmer's market for raw milk and proper garden hen's eggs. With farms on my mind, I also decided to introduce myself to some neighbors, a job which could be procrastinated. It would also mean telling them about my aunt's passing, which I imagine they wouldn't be aware of as she died fairly far from home. There were other things on my to-do list, like washing the old bed sheets, clearing out the wardrobe, and getting an internet connection. There wasn't even phone signal out here, but everything could wait until tomorrow. It had been a long day of driving and discovering, and I was ready to collapse into bed and sleep my weariness away. I lay in bed before drifting off, staring out of the long, curtainless window. I hadn't considered how dark the country could actually be at night. In the city, I was used to the warm glow of streetlights, constant flashes of the car headlamps going past, a view between cracks in the curtains of 24-hour lit shop displays. Here, I had only the moonlight, and outside was like a void. An endless ocean of velvet inky black lay before me. Land meeting sky was only apparent when I began to see the stars, white pinpricks of brightness, that the light pollution I was accustomed to had obscured. A constellation of 6 bright points of light hung there like a framed masterpiece. There was nothing frightening about being surrounded by this total darkness and silence. It was peaceful beyond anything I'd experienced. This was my home, somewhere so quiet I could hear my heartbeat, somewhere so dark that the stars had their own shadows. I must have slept eventually, calm and dreamless, my first step taken into a new world. In the morning, it took me a moment to figure out where I was, so far from the bright and noisy home I was used to. When I saw those stretching green fields, I quickly remembered, sitting up in bed and smiling at the blissful day ahead of me. I put on yesterday's shirt and cords and ate a bowl of bland and dry cornflakes from the pantry for breakfast. Outside of the window, the garden was beckoning me, but my higher priority was finding my way into town to empty the closet and fill the fridge. I searched in cupboards for a while for black plastic bags, eventually finding a roll of them, alongside a year's supply of tissue boxes and dishwasher tablets. I made my way back up to the bedroom, but looking in the closet, guilt overcame me. The woman who these dresses belonged to had given me all she owned, and here I was, throwing away the only personal possessions she had, just one day after moving in. I pushed the feeling aside, convincing myself that her clothes were mine now to deal with, and she clearly didn't think much of personal possessions, judging by the fact that she had so few, but still decided to leave it for later. Out of apprehension, respect, or laziness, I'm unsure. That task postponed, I had to inventory all the food in the house. Even if I wasn't going to get rid of all of Aunt Amy's clothes yet, I still had to go out to buy groceries. 9 rungs up the wooden ladder into the pantry, I discovered that what the night before had seemed like a few spare cans was actually enough to last one person for months. At least 40 cans of legumes, 28 glass jars, each holding 8 hot dogs, 3 wholesale boxes, each holding 24 tins of vegetable soup, 40 pounds of uncooked rice, 6 large bags of sugar, 20 more of flour. I was relieved to find a couple dozen boxes of UHT milk on the top shelf. No more dry cornflakes. Back down the ladder in the kitchen, I found bottles of cooking oil and vinegar. I'd never baked before, but I had all the ingredients needed to make bread, and Amy had plenty enough cookbooks, though the titles Cooking for One and Fresh from the Can admittedly made me cringe a little. I wouldn't need to go shopping today, I decided, and heated myself a can of soup for lunch. It was good, very good. I understand how my aunt could have lived off this alone. It was nicer than anything I could ever make. Even if I didn't need to go out, I would still be productive. I washed the old sheets on my bed, flipped the mattress, and dusted the floor. By 4 p.m., my bathtub was polished, and every third-story window was cleaned. I felt pleased with this progress, and since there was no Wi-Fi, I chose to reward myself by relaxing with a book in the tiny library upstairs, instead of the usual web surfing and messaging the few friends I had. I'd get the internet set up when I went into town the next day, I thought. So deeply entranced was I by the pages of Planting Perennials, The Joys of Gardening, that it was only when I grew weary of straining my eyes to see the pages that I suddenly became aware of how dark it had grown outside. I looked at my phone, the sudden brightness of the screen stinging my eyes. 8:45 p.m. Battery on 12%. I closed the book, returning to my room to plug my phone in. My cozy bed with its freshly washed sheets beckoned me, and I changed into my nightshirt and crawled between the sheets, facing the dark window. I don't know how many hours I spent staring at the stars, but as the sky grew darker and the land below altogether disappeared, I must have drifted off into yet another dreamless night of starry black. Waking up the second morning, I knew instantly where I was, but had a new confusion on my mind. Where was my phone? I looked down to the plug socket. Charger switched on, but no phone on the bedside table. I assumed that I'd turned the charger on and just forgotten to plug the phone in it, but after checking through my pockets and failing to find it, I came to a new conclusion, that it had fallen off the table. On my hands and knees, I scanned the bare floor beneath the bed for my phone that just wasn't there. Well, I'd find it at some point. But there was no need to rush around looking. It's not like I had a signal out here anyway. If I hadn't found it by the end of the day, I'd replace it with a new phone when I went into town the next day. Technology had no place out here anyway. Gazing across the 4 fields to the neighbor's farm, I felt peaceful, alone in the good way. Downstairs, I climbed the 11 rungs to the pantry and made myself a bowl of cornflakes, today with milk. I liked UHT milk, creamier than the fresh stuff. Outside, the huge and wild garden with its tall grasses and pink hollyhocks called to me, but I decided it could wait. Once I'd finished reading my gardening book, I'd be far better equipped to fix up the flower beds. I returned to the 4th floor, finding Aunt Amy's old armchair in the library waiting for me again, with planting perennials on the windowsill where I'd left it. Hours crept by as I read into the night, stopping only when it grew too dark to distinguish black type from yellowed paper. I placed the book back down and wandered the dark corridors back to my room, where I climbed into bed, having not changed from my nightclothes that morning. I had been reading a riveting chapter, but it would have to wait for tomorrow. Gazing up out of my curtainless window, I watched the 5 stars making up the masterpiece constellation until I passed out. On my 3rd day in the house, I decided it was about time to take a bath. I filled the white tub with hot water, relaxing under a blanket of bubbles. The 2 girls in Monet's poppy field watched me, and their calm, smudgy colors filled me with peace. I could have relaxed in the bath for hours, but looking at the poppies reminded me of my book. It'd be a far better use of my time relaxing in the library. This time, it wasn't the dark that stopped me from reading. Bright daylight still outside, I was pulled out of my non-fictional, perennial world by a growl from my stomach. I hadn't eaten in probably over 24 hours. I made my way down long corridors and carpeted staircases to the kitchen, then back up the 14 rungs to where the tins of soup were. As my soup bubbled in a pan, I thought about making bread to go with it, but the time needed to do so felt to me like it wasn't worth it for such a meager outcome. The soup was even more delicious than I'd remembered. Maybe I should grow my own vegetables and try making soup myself. That sounded like fun, and I'd seen a book on growing food in the library. There were only a few pages of planting perennials left. I would hopefully be able to start reading Gardener's Guide to Growing Root Vegetables today. After rinsing my soup bowl, I returned to the 5th floor library to read. Tonight, the darkness failed to alert me. I awoke the next morning in my armchair, the book in my lap and the sun bright above me. I stood up to stretch and look out the window onto the fields below. The view from here was the same as in my bedroom, albeit an elevated angle. 5 grassy, stretching fields out to the neighboring farm. I took a moment to stand there. I felt no hunger, no desire to go out. I could have spent all day reading, but somehow that didn't seem so appealing. I'd done nothing but read each day. After having been here for only... How long had I been here? A week? It must have been longer than that, maybe 3 weeks. There was a clock and a calendar in the bedroom, and my mind was now set on trying to remember the month and year. I stepped out of the library into the long, narrow corridor. I moved past doors into other rooms which in all my time here I hadn't yet explored, some open, some closed. I turned the corner 4 times, a full square, and after I once more walked past the library, I found the staircase and descended to the 6th floor. In the corridor-less 6th floor, I moved from room to room in search for the stairs down. The staircase led directly into a drawing room, a large table in the center for entertaining guests, but no decorations to be seen, or windows for that matter. From there, I entered a large bathroom. There was a door on the far wall, and another to my left. I took the nearest door and found myself in the nursery. I had been in this room before. I could find my way from here. I shrunk onto my hands and knees and wriggled through the tight crawl space into the closet, clambering out from the window seat at the other end. The window above the seat had the curtains drawn, and I opened them to reveal a black sky with 3 cold stars making up a lonely constellation. I shivered. Opening the nursery door, I finally found a staircase and descended to floor 6. Floor 6 was incredibly dark. I didn't remember even having been on this floor. I reached out, attempting to find a light switch, or at least to guide my way along the wall. There was nothing, not at arm's stretch in either direction. I took a small step forwards in the darkness and fell, tumbling down the staircase. I hit a door at the bottom, hard. Attempting to pull myself to my feet in the tight space between the stairs and the door was no easy feat, not in the pitch blackness. I eventually hooked my struggling arm over the door handle, and it creaked open. Beyond it was floor 6, the familiar library with my cozy armchair, and a long corridor carpeted with green. It was very late and dark, so I turned the lights on. It was tempting just to sit and read for a while. I was on a particularly fascinating chapter of Gardener's Guide to Growing Root Vegetables, in which I could learn how to grow a potato plant from a leftover potato. No, I had a mission. I walked down the corridor and down the steps to Aunt Amy's 4th floor bedroom. I opened the door of the room and suddenly remembered, silly, I didn't have a calendar here, or a clock. Not since my phone had gone missing. It didn't really matter what day it was anyway. I'd lived here all my life, and was perfectly happy. I sat on my bed and looked out of the window at the landscape, a vibrant blue sky, and 6 green, grassy fields stretching out into the horizon. I Woke with a Start by Dalton 334. I woke with a start. What was that noise I had just heard? Did it come from inside or outside? Why did it frighten me so much? Then I remembered I was home alone. My mom had gone on a trip with my aunt and hadn't come back yet. I threw a shirt on and hurried to the front door and opened it. That probably wasn't the best idea, but at the time I was half asleep. I didn't see anything outside, and I closed the door. On my way back to my room, bam, bam, bam. I jumped out of my skin because it sounded closer, but it wasn't coming from the front door. At this point, I had no idea what to do, so I stood still in the middle of the hallway. Now, I'm not a particularly paranormal believing person, but once I felt breathing on the back of my neck, it made my hair stand on end. I was petrified. I jerked around, nothing. But then I heard a voice. An old, raspy, evil voice. It told me, "You're nothing, little human. End your suffering before I do." I woke with a start. What was that noise I just heard? Did it come from inside or outside? A Voice in the Dark by Izzy Stewart. Before I tell you my story, I'm not crazy, and everything that happened is true. It was December 5th, and I was waiting for my friend to pick me up for the Christmas party. I was kind of nervous, being the first party I've ever gone to or been invited to since I was not popular at school. Probably because I was blind, and having a blind person at a party is more like babysitting them so they won't get hurt than it is having fun and dancing and drinking like idiots. A few minutes later, my friend Jenny came and helped me get into the car. Thoughts of being rejected at the party made my stomach twist in knots as she kept telling me every 10 minutes how close we were. When we arrived, she held my hand as she walked me to the house. When Rachel answered the door and hugged me, I stepped back a little, startled by all of her sudden hugging and how nice she was being to me. Usually Rachel never talked to me or asked how I've been doing, so this came to me as a shock. When we stepped in the house, we were immediately hit with loud hard rock music and the smell of alcohol in the air. I gagged a little, trying to hold back the urge to puke. We talked to Rachel for a little bit before one of her friends called her over to play beer pong with them. The loud music and the smell of alcohol made my head hurt, and I needed to step outside to get some fresh air. I told Jenny, and we stepped out on the back porch that wrapped around the whole house. Feeling a little better, I decided since Jenny and I have been so busy trying to graduate from high school, we really never talked to each other. Since I stayed in one room all day and she went to different classes, it made it difficult to start a conversation, but we finally managed to find something to talk about and started laughing. But this ended when her friend Elizabeth told her to come help her with something. I can't see people, but sometimes when Jenny and I would hang out at lunch, Elizabeth would come and hang out with us, so I also recognized her voice and the smell of her fruity perfume. Jenny pulled a plastic chair for me and helped me sit down. Then she told me she would be right back. I sat and tried to gather my thoughts on what to ask Jenny next when she came back. "Hey, sorry, I'm back." "That didn't take long." "Yeah, so what did you want to ask me next?" Finding it a little odd how much happiness was in her voice, I brushed it off, thinking she was just having a good time. "So, Elodie, tell me about yourself." Thrown off a little by her question, I started to reply to her question telling her my favorite hobbies and how I like to listen to the news every once in a while, when all of a sudden she blurted out of nowhere, "I'm sorry you got in a car crash." A little confused and frightened, I slowly replied, "What do you mean you're sorry I got in a car crash? I never got in a car crash because my friends are safe drivers." There was a stillness in the air, waiting for Jenny to reply, but she said nothing. "Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that. Elizabeth needed me, and..." Irritated, I cut her off, thinking now she was just pulling a prank and was trying to scare me. "What is wrong with you?" I yelled, my hands clenched in a fist, even though I could not see her to punch her. I could tell she was frightened because it took her a while to answer. "Elodie, what are you talking about?" "Stop playing around. I know you said I'm sorry you got in a car crash." "No, I was with Elizabeth inside, I swear." Feeling my anger rising more, I decided not to ask her any more questions, and the silence grew awkward after a minute. She cleared her throat and asked me if I wanted to go home. About to reply and say yes, a bad feeling all of a sudden washed over me, like it was tugging at me, telling me to stay where I was at. "No, I think I'll ask Rachel if I can spend the night." "Are you sure?" "Yes." I heard footsteps fade as I stayed in the chair, trying to gather my thoughts on what the heck just happened. I must have fallen asleep because Rachel tapped on my shoulder, making me almost fall out of my seat. "I'm sorry, Elodie. I did not mean to scare you. I was just seeing if you were okay." "What time is it?" "It's 11 a.m. "How long have I been out for?" "About an hour. You seem tired, so I left you there to sleep. Would you like to come inside now?" "Yes, please." She walked me inside and sat me in a reclining chair and turned on the news for me. I listened to the different stories of illnesses being cured when a certain story got my attention. 3 people killed in a two-way collision. Police found the 3 girls, Jenny Stewart driving, Anna Anderson in the passenger seat, and Ariel Clemens, behind the driver, were killed right as the semi hit them head on. Police are investigating why this happened. I instantly felt sick to my stomach, and thoughts flooded my brain, trying to figure out what had happened to Jenny. And worse, if I went home with them, would I be dead too? My thoughts also popped back to when whoever told me I was going to get in a car crash was right. And I'm lucky I listened to it and did not get back in the car. Then I realized everything Jenny said was true. She was with Elizabeth. She could not have talked to her and come back that fast. There was no way. So that only meant one thing. My stomach dropped as I kept trying to process this. A ghost told me not to get in the car. I started crying uncontrollably when suddenly I felt a cold hand press down on my shoulder, and the smell of that fruity perfume filled the air. Monsters by Rob, KSN. I never found stories about zombies and monsters scary as a kid. They're one of those things that seems laughably unrealistic until you experience it for yourself. My experience has changed the way I've heard such stories forever. I was at Andy's, just for a beer and TV. Andy was my best friend. We'd known each other since high school, when I was the lonely dorky kid, and she decided to team up with me on a class project. We clicked. We'd spend every weekend night together after that. Then in college became roommates, before Andy had to move away to be near her ill father again. We were watching something mindless, probably some comedy quiz show, I don't remember. I do remember that it was exactly 10:37 p.m. when Andy's phone rang. It's funny how it's the small details that stick. I turned the volume on the telly right down so that she could talk, but she barely said anything. Mostly the odd, or oh, but nothing from which I could figure out who was calling or what was happening. The only hint I had were the expressions on my friend's face. They were disturbing. When she first picked up, she had looked wearily frustrated. That quickly changed to a mixture of shock and confusion, and then pure terror. I held my breath unintentionally, straining to hear what was being said that had caused such a reaction. After only a couple of minutes, Andy moved the phone away from her head, face still in shock, then very slowly turned to look at me. My dad. I'm so sorry. This had been coming for a long time, but I understand that nobody can ever be prepared to lose a parent whom they love. No, not that. I frowned at her, confused, but feeling a deep sense of dread and panic. The look on her face told me that this was something beyond anything either of us could have imagined. Andy, tell me. She ran a hand through her short, spiked hair and looked up at me, frazzled. It sounds like, she breathed deeply. He got up for a drink when he saw a monster outside his window. A monster? That's what he said. Big, dark, red eyes and spiky fangs. Crazy old man stuff. I didn't want to insult her family, but that's what it was. Really, wasn't it? Yeah. She had a look about her that was baffled beyond anything. That's what I thought, but he was running. I didn't think he was well enough that he could run, but he was. He told me he was locking himself in the bathroom so that it wouldn't see him, but I heard this kind of crunching sound, like something breaking in the background, and she paused. The phone just went dead. Not like line cut dead, but like he'd suddenly dropped it. I heard it hit the ground, then the crunching kind of noise again, and then just nothing. I could understand why she hadn't been responding to him much. I was speechless with confusion. You want to call the police? I eventually asked. No, she said, voice certain. I want to go check on him. Now? She answered by standing up and pulling on her desert boots and pocketing a utility knife. I wanted to comment on how we needed to make sure that her father wasn't having a mental breakdown, to make a joke that would reassure the both of us that this was nothing serious, but the fear on her face and the urgency in her actions had me convinced, though regretfully, that it was something much, much more serious than that. Andy's dad lived 6 houses down from her, less than a minute's walk, so that she could constantly be on call. The way she sped along the road cut the walk to less than a second. She dashed up the garden path to his front porch and hammered on the door. "Dad, it's Andy!" she yelled. A few seconds went by with no answer. "Daddy?" I wanted to tell her to be calm, that he'd take a minute to get to the door in his state, but I knew that would have been a lie. I could see from here that the bathroom window was shattered. I didn't want to look inside. "Dad," she wailed. "It's me, Andrea, please." As she pounded on the door, I took a hesitant step towards the window. Trapped in the broken glass around the edges were black tufts of what appeared to be fur. The hairs were thick, but not unevenly wiry like a large dog's coat. More even, almost like the strands from a silky black cloth. I also saw scraps of the cotton and down of an old man's bed jacket. "Andy," I called, my voice weak. She flicked her head towards me, the hope in her eyes quickly fading to distress. She stepped across the grass towards the bathroom, and unlike me, she was brave enough to look inside. "Nothing," she said quietly. The lights were off, and it was too dark to make much out, but there was no sound or movement from within. It was then that I felt something move swiftly behind me. I tensed all over and saw Andy's green eyes widen. "Andy, don't," she whispered, as quiet as her voice would go. I began to turn my head. "No," she said, quieter, more frightened. I was frozen. "Andy." I took a step towards her, meaning to move back towards the porch, towards light, but in that moment of movement, any hope was lost. An inhuman, roaring screech came from behind me, deep like the earth, but painfully sharp like a train whistle, a dual voice. I dived against the wall in horror, and heard a scream of agony from my best friend beside me. I had fallen flat on the ground, my face burning sore against the wet grass, and I attempted to look out at what was happening. I saw Andy's legs shaking in her desert boots, quivering a couple inches from the ground. She wasn't screaming any longer, just gurgling. The beast who stood in front of her filled me with true fear, a ghastly realization of every other child's nightmares. Enormous black feet stood before me, dark like the night. The heels were huge and hard, the hooves of a horse, but where toes should have been. There were long, fat, twisting talons with hooked claws. Between the monstrous toes of his left foot were tatters of fabric, beige faux sheepskin of moccasin slippers. Not that it had been torn from a person, but the remainders of what the thing had once worn. I saw Andy's shaking legs go completely still and limp. I desperately wanted to cry out her name, but my mouth just hung open in an aching and horrified silence. The monster dropped her lifeless body to the ground and dashed away in a heavy torrent of shadow just as it had arrived. I finally found my voice. "Andy?" I croaked, crawling on the damp grass towards where she lay. Her lip was split, her eyes closed and blackened, rips pulled in her green sweater by claws I imagined to be like the ones I had seen on those demonic feet. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I reached out to stroke her face, to attempt to resuscitate my clearly dead best friend, when she suddenly twitched. I pulled my hand back, startled but ecstatic. Her swollen eyes fluttered open, and her lips parted, bloody spit drooling out. "Andy!" But this wasn't Andy. Her back clicked as her shoulders pulled back inhumanly, elbows bent as her hands twisted and elongated. Her knees snapped backwards into devilish, dog-like legs, and her talons tore out of her boots, leaving only scraps of blood-stained suede, just as a remainder of the moccasins had been on her father's feet. I gazed back up to her face, misery and horror spreading throughout me in a tingling cold sensation. Her once green eyes were hollow and a deep bloody red, her heart-shaped lips now a freakishly wide cracked smile, beyond which was a gaping maw full of teeth like broken glass. A deep crackling came from her throat. Not her, it. This wasn't Andy. I told myself this was a monster. It raised a talon towards me, and I tensed. But to my surprise, it didn't strike me. This wasn't a threat. It was a gesture of, what, friendship? Apology? Its outstretched finger was like E.T.'s, gentle and inquisitive. I very, very hesitantly lifted my hand towards the creature, when it suddenly lashed its arm out with a bellow. I rolled flat on my back to avoid its claws rushing at me. This creature was not a friend, and it was not Andy. I grabbed for the scraps of Andy's jacket left on the ground, fishing for the knife in her pocket. Rolling back to my knees, I opened the blade and aimed it at the monster, hand trembling. "This is not your friend," I repeated in my head. "This is evil. This thing wants to kill you." I feared a similar fate. "Andy," I sobbed, shaking my head. The beast's cutthroat mouth widened, and I turned my head away. "Goodbye." I plunged the knife deep into the monster's neck. It wailed and gurgled its dual tone of pain, spasming on the ground. I tried to convince myself that this is what Andy would have wanted. She was too good to live the rest of her life as a ruthless, senseless creature, hunting those who she had once loved. I was heartbroken, but I knew that I had done the right thing. I stood up, looking down at the corpse of the silky midnight monster that lay on the ground at my feet. Her father's monster was out there somewhere, attacking more innocent people. This would certainly be harder to explain to his doctors than if he had died of cancer as expected. With the idea that these creatures may recognize each other by smell and not attack in mind, I pulled a few tufts of the shiny fur away from the dead monster below me and made my way out of Andy's dad's front yard. The road at almost 11 p.m. was dark and dead silent. I couldn't see a single movement beneath the sparse street lamps. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a loud cry, and it dashed towards me. Hiding behind a car, I saw the dad monster tearing into the upper arm of his elderly neighbor. Before my eyes, she transformed into a devil-legged grass-toothed beast, her joints cracking as her new body shifted down her front path onto the road to hunt for more. I backed away, horrified, as the new monster threw its body against a neighbor's window, breaking in to a response of loud screams as it searched for new prey. I sprinted down the road back to Andy's house, where I stuffed my sweater with food cans from the kitchen, and practically flew down the stairs to the basement, locking the door behind me and shoving her old broken fridge against it as a barricade. This was the only room in the house with no windows, and the thick walls of underground concrete provided at least a little security. I curled up on the cold floor, shaking, and pulled a towel from the laundry basket over myself as a blanket. The apocalypse was upon us. I woke with a stiff neck and a sore back, shivering on the cold floor. It took me a moment to figure out where I was in the dark. I picked myself up from the ground and warily pulled myself over to the door, throwing my weight against the refrigerator to shift it aside. With my ear to the door, I confirmed that there were no monsters in the immediate area and unbolted the entrance to my hiding place. Now was as good a time as any to collect more food, before the whole world was changed into nightmare creatures. As I reached the top of the cellar stairs, I was unsettled to discover that it was still night. The kitchen clock read 5:45 a.m. I'd only slept for 6 hours, no wonder I was so tired. Whilst the overwhelming logical thought in my mind was to just get food and go back to sleep, a part of me wanted to inspect the damage done outside. Was Andy's basement the only safe house on the street? Would I find other survivors? I wouldn't need a flashlight. The sun was beginning to rise, a dim blue touching the horizon above the street of broken windows and smashed doors. I pulled on Andy's black parka, tufts of fur in hand, and attempted to camouflage myself a little better. I crept silently down the street, stopping behind cars and hedges every few moments to look around for monsters. As I stood up from behind a car, across the street, a pair of red eyes met mine. I froze, captivated by the horrifying gaze, then quickly ducked down again, panic filling my chest. I turned around again slowly, and was both stunned and appalled by what I saw. As the early sun rose, light hit the creature, and it began to change. Red eyes faded to brown. Silken black hair shrunk back, revealing an ordinary human face. An elderly woman, naked except for shreds of a cardigan and one badly torn and overstretched stocking, stumbled back on the pavement, shocked, and walked awkwardly to her front door. I stood up in a disturbed wonder. Up and down the street, people with shredded clothes and scratched bodies were deliriously stumbling up sidewalks and driveways. This wasn't like a zombie apocalypse, where a person became some kind of an undead demon. They were more like werewolves, wild and evil at night, than human come morning. A cold feeling punched me in the chest like nothing I'd ever felt before. I made my way up a familiar garden path to a familiar broken window. Below it lay a young woman, naked except for shreds of suede boots, lips split, short spiked hair wet with blood. She was still and gray, with a large gash in her neck. As confused, ordinary people, no longer beasts, made their ways back home, a single monster knelt on wet grass in front of an old man's house and wept for Andy. Nina by Rob KSN. It all started with my asshole of a boss, Michael. Mondays are the worst day of the week as it is, and all I have to look forward to is finishing work early at 2 p.m. If only so that I can spend the evening watching YouTube videos and eating microwave snacks. Today should have been no different. I was sick of sitting at my desk already by 11 a.m., and I knew that there were 2 microwave pizzas waiting for me in my fridge back at home. All I had to do was pretend to be working for 3 more hours. Then I was done, back to my apartment to waste the evening. It shouldn't be difficult, I thought to myself. All I have to do is look intently at my computer screen every time somebody walks past. That's when Michael came along and ruined everything. I'm going to need you to stay until 5 tonight. We're short on staff. I'm so sorry if that's an inconvenience. His tone was sympathetic, but I knew he only spoke that way to guilt me into agreeing. Actually, I have plans already. I don't know if I'll be able to, I responded in my most persuasive voice, growing frustrated already. It's only 3 hours, he pleaded. This is the first time I've had to ask you, and I promise it will be the last. Sure, it'd be the last, just like Saturday was the last time he'd call me in on a weekend, and the Tuesday before had been the last time I'd been made to cut my lunch break to take on a sick colleague's shift. I understand. I don't mind staying late, sir. I smiled fakely. He seemed pleased with that response, but I meant nothing by it. As soon as lunch started, I was walking out of here early, and I had no intention of returning until tomorrow. I left my super noodle in my desk drawer, deciding that my self-prescribed day off should be accompanied by a slightly more glamorous lunch, namely, sausage rolls from the supermarket deli counter. Minutes later, I was strolling through the park, greasy pastry crumbs covering my hands and face as I stuffed myself with hot, salty, processed meat. Then I saw her. The most beautiful creature I had ever laid my eyes upon. She was short, blonde, wearing a cotton sundress as she walked her dog. I grinned at her, flakes of pastry falling from my mouth. She beamed back. Did she find me cute, or was she mocking me? I approached her, slowly. I felt so awkward. I couldn't talk to girls. But she was so gorgeous, I didn't want to lose this chance. I started a conversation the only way I knew I could. "Can I pet your dog?" "Of course. He's called Larry." Larry was a huge, black staffy with a wide, drooling smile. "Aren't you a lovely boy?" I bent down to stroke his head, and he lunged for my sausage roll. His beautiful owner pulled him back, half shocked, half amused. "I'm so sorry," she laughed nervously. "It's fine," I told her, sounding as cool as I could manage. "I'm Brad, by the way. Nice to meet you." I extended a hand, palm filthy with pastry grease, dog hair, and sweat. She shook it anyway. "Nice to meet you too, Brad. I'm Nina." Nina. She was perfect. Larry was dragging her onwards, so I decided it would be nice to walk and talk. "You want some sausage roll?" She shook her head. I couldn't blame her. The paper bag it was in oozed in oil, and each bite I took felt like my arteries were clogging. "I could buy you an ice cream." I nodded towards the ice cream van that was parked on the grass. It was midsummer, and children on their holidays swarmed around it like wasps. "I'd like that," she accepted. We sat on the grass together, her with a lemonade lolly, me with a 99 flake, and Larry with the remainder of my lunch. There were sparks between us. I could tell. It was evident. No girls had ever treated me like this before, be it for my poor eating habits or the unattractive complexion they had given me, but Nina didn't seem to care. The way she smiled at me made it seem that she saw no wrong in me. I decided now was a better time than any to be forward. "Do you have a boyfriend?" A bright pink blush erupted across her face, and she shook her head. "Boys don't really like me." "I can't see why not," I told her. "You're the most beautiful person I've ever seen." Her blush deepened. "You're just saying that." "I'm not. I want to see you again, Nina. I've had more fun talking to you today than I've had in the past year of my life." She seemed to like this. "I'll give you my phone number," I said, reaching for a pen in my pocket. "We could meet here again tomorrow if you like." She accepted, and I felt ecstatic. Monday had gone from the worst day of the week to the best day of my life. Michael, however, was not impressed. Tuesday morning. "Where were you last night, Bradley? I was depending on you." I groaned. I forgot to say I had a barber's appointment at 1:30. He looked at my greasy flat hair and uneven stubble, unconvinced, but sighed and walked off. I was stunned. I hadn't been in more trouble, especially not when Michael was so irrational. He acted like owning a small business was the hardest thing on earth, that all of his employees relied on the part-time computer work I did, and he couldn't afford to lose me. I knew this was a lie, though. He acted like he needed me to manipulate me into doing more work than I had signed up for. I was glad to sneak out half an hour before my shift ended, excited to see the girl of my dreams, Nina. She was waiting in the park for me with her dog when I arrived. "I'm so sorry I'm late," I said. She smiled sweetly. "You're not late. Larry wanted to run around." He was now on his lead, panting, drooling. This meant she was done walking him, therefore was free and had come out to spend time with me. "Do you want to come over to my place?" I asked. She looked away for a moment, seemingly nervous. I don't know. I need to go home for lunch soon, and I've got Larry with me." "I have a basement flat," I reassured her. "It has a garden that Larry can run around in all he likes, and there are pizzas in the freezer." "Well, I like pizza," she grinned, looking back at me. I was thrilled. My dream girl was actually coming home with me. As we were walking along the path to my house, I became increasingly nervous. Had I tidied enough? What if it smelled bad and I hadn't noticed? What if she saw me only as a friend? I knew that she didn't seem to care about my appearance and bad habits, but the third question genuinely frightened me. Testing it could be either a win or lose-all situation. I came to the conclusion in my mind that if she didn't like me now, she definitely wouldn't like me when she saw my mess of a home, so it was worth the risk. I shut my eyes and reached for her hand. The feeling of her fingers splitting in between mine sent a rush of endorphins coursing through my veins. She liked me. A girl actually liked me. Not just any girl, but the most beautiful girl in the world. I felt like I was flying. "This is it," I said quietly, motioning towards my home with a nod of my head, nervous that she'd let go of my hand. She did, temporarily, to open the side gate and let Larry into the garden. "He's okay there?" "I promise." I showed her down the steps to my front door, which I unlocked, letting her in. "This is my home." Nina made her way down the narrow, dark corridor to the living room. Food packets and clothes, clean and dirty, were strewn about on the floor. I felt embarrassed, but she seemed not to notice, sitting on the grubby, second-hand sofa comfortably. She laughed, and I looked up to see what had amused her. Larry, outside, was licking the windows, which were at ground level for him, but flush with the ceiling of my apartment indoors. "You have a lot of games," Nina said excitedly. Oh yeah." I followed her gaze to the multiple consoles I had. Xbox, PS1, even an old Dreamcast. As the age of the machine suggested, I hadn't played much in recent years. I had plenty enough time to, but there were better uses of my time, like eating, sleeping, and mindlessly watching videos online. "I don't really play much." "That's okay," she said. "We could play other games." I liked the sound of that. I approached her, sitting close to her on the sofa. She giggled, somewhat nervously, as I put my arm around her shoulders. "What kind of game do you want to play?" I attempted to say seductively, moving my head in the hopes that she might kiss me. Meeting my eyes, she froze, pulling away a little. "I think I should go," she said, eyes still wide. "But you only just got here." "I know, but I can't be late home." "I'll come back tomorrow. I know where you live now." That relaxed me a little. "Okay, babe, I can't wait to see you again." She walked up the steps from my basement apartment, waving to me as she reached the top, but I could still sense nervousness. What had I done to disgust her? As she walked away, her pet beside her, I pondered what could have put her off so suddenly. I decided to take a shower for the first time that week, scrubbing grease from my hair and BO from the rest of my body. I attempted to shave my face evenly, managing to avoid any cuts, and clip my nails. I sprayed on enough deodorant to choke an army and slapped my neck with bay rum, looking into the mirror, proud. Tomorrow would be a good day. I was awoken by a phone call. Yeah, hello? "Bradley, listen." The voice on the other end sounded urgent. My half-asleep mind hadn't fully registered who it was yet. "What?" I groaned. It was 7 a.m. I wasn't accustomed to being awake at this time. "It's your boss, Bradley." "Oh shit, Michael." "Listen, don't bother coming into work today. I'm sorry to let you go at such short notice, but I've given you too many chances already. I can't afford to keep paying you if you're going to leave work early every day after having done nothing. My niece is starting in your position this afternoon. I can pay you until Friday, but I can't let you come back. This business is hard enough to keep open, and you're a drain on my finances." "Bradley? Are you there?" I hung up the phone. I wasn't even mad. I'd have to find a new job, sure, but I was seeing Nina later, and nothing could bring me down from that. The hours dripped by until she arrived. I spent the morning lazily picking up dirty clothes and throwing them into a corner, then dusting up crumbs from the carpet with my hands. The house almost looked worse like this. The stains on the carpet showed, and my lack of taste in furniture was far more evident. That didn't matter though. Nina accepted me anyway. It was 3 p.m. when she arrived, and I was worried she'd never come. She didn't have the dog with her this time, and she was dressed in a denim jacket and a tiny yellow dress, her slim legs showing. I tugged the hem of my t-shirt down. "Hi, Nina," I greeted her excitedly. "Hi, Brad," she smiled in response. The nervousness was still there. I couldn't figure out why. I showed her inside, locking the front door behind her. "I tidied for you," I said proudly. She nodded in acknowledgement, taking a seat at the edge of the sofa, uncomfortably stiff. Watching her was making me uncomfortably stiff, in an altogether different way. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked, sitting beside her. I put an arm around her, and her breathing hitched. Was this panic or excitement? She didn't respond to my question, rather remained silent. I knew what this meant, and before the silence turned awkward, I leaned in to kiss her. I was wearing aftershave, and I'd used mouthwash. There was nothing that could put her off of me this time. She squirmed, and I held her tight, shoving my tongue into her mouth. When I pulled away, she stared up at me in horror. "Brad, I have to go." She tried to get up, but I grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her onto my lap. "Please, baby," I kissed her neck. "Don't leave me quite yet." I slid a hand up her thigh, and she desperately pushed it away. I laughed at her shyness. "Third date is customary, didn't you know that?" "I want to go home," she pleaded. It was as though she had tried to make her voice strong, but it came out as a sob. She stood up from my lap and quickly moved towards the door, tugging at the handle as it refused to open. I slowly approached her, and as I drew near, she turned from the front door and looked up at me in horror, her mouth slightly open and her eyes starred with wetness. I took her hand from the door handle and moved it towards my crotch, pressing it against my hardened bulge. She didn't resist. Her arm was limp, and her eyes didn't move from mine. "There's a good girl." I leaned in to kiss her on the lips once more, when I heard a loud banging at the door. I shoved Nina to one side into my bathroom, shutting the door behind her, and unlocked the front door. I was horrified to see who it was. "How can I help you, officer?" "We need to ask you a few questions concerning a missing 9-year-old girl. It's reported that recently she's been seen with a man of your description." Oddly Not, by Rob KSN. You wake in the early morning, and you feel like you're floating. It's that time that you can know the hour and the minute without having to see a clock. The room is oddly not cold. It's very dark, but oddly not dark. There's something in the room with you that you can sense the presence of, but you're oddly not scared. It's oddly not nothing too, you just feel safe. Your sleeping mind can't quite make sense of the presence, but you know that it is a noise, a slow, gentle, deep hum, not machine or animal, but almost very much human. Almost. It's a voice. You can hear a voice. "I'm going to tell you a story. Do you want to hear a story?" Your head stirs as though you were asleep. You can't make yourself nod, but you think yes. Your feet momentarily tingle, but you quickly lose the feeling. Only now you realize how numb your body is, how much you want to stretch and feel something. There was once a little girl and a kind woman. The little girl was lost in a crowd and crying. Her mother was very unwell, and she'd been trying to make her way to the hospital to see her, but she was small and couldn't find her way. Is this a sad story? The kind woman saw the child and asked her what was wrong. The girl sadly responded that she was lost. The woman offered to take the child to the police station. This is a kind story of good-hearted people. The little girl held the kind woman's hand, and they walked together through the quiet streets. The child suddenly let go of the woman's hand and ran, and the woman turned just too late to see her attackers, men with guns and fighting knives, closing in on her from the seemingly quiet streets behind. She lost her arm and her head and her handbag. No. Because you see this, the lost girl was a trap to lead the woman through a certain neighborhood to the police station, a place where a gang was waiting to attack and rob whatever kind of person took pity on their lost child. The trap they had set you. No, let me finish. The trap they had set up. The little girl's mother wasn't sick at all. That's a horrible story. The woman deserved to die. How can you say that? It wasn't a trap at all. The little girl was lost, and her mother was sick in a hospital. The woman didn't take pity on her at all. She would pretend to be leading her to the police station, but instead take her back to her own home and hurt and abuse and probably eventually kill her. The neighborhood they were attacked in wasn't even on the way to the police station. I don't understand. People lie. I don't understand the moral of the story. Some stories have no morals. Your body grows hot, then cold. The room is very dark, but oddly not dark. There's something in the room with you that you can sense the presence of, but you're oddly not scared. Not scared, but sad and angry. So mildly sad and angry that you interpret it not as emotion, but an itch in your mind. Would you rather hear another story? Your stories are no good. This one has a proper moral. I don't trust you. Then you're learning. There was once a little boy who owned a camera. His father told him, "Take photos of all that you love and find beautiful, for one day everything will be gone." The boy took photos of things he loved and that he knew would be gone. Flowers and butterflies and birthday cake. They were bad photos. He was only small, but they mattered to him a lot. This is a story about loss, but the one thing the child would never photograph was his parents. He wished them to never be gone, and as fate took its course, "Don't you fucking do this," in a sad and sweet irony, they died unphotographed by their son. He was still a small boy at the time, and he had lost them with no physical memory, only his mental image of them. I understand this one because the memory in your mind is so much better than a temporary memory on paper. The photographs won't last, but his memories will. Fool. His memories won't last either. The moral is that being sentimental means absolutely nothing in a world in which we all die. You're tricking me. I'm teaching you. Maybe I don't want to be taught. You're awake in the early morning, and you feel like you're floating. It's that time you can know the hour and the minute without having to see a clock. The room is oddly not cold, but you want to shiver and cry. I can tell you one final story. I'm glad you're not putting up a fight. There was once a mother whose son was on life support. I don't want to hear this story. He was in a coma. He'd had an asthma attack, passed out, and never woken up. Never makes it sound so forever. She would sit at his bedside every day and tell him stories. Stories of how her day had been, and stories of her own childhood. She'd read him books from when he was little, books from when she was little. She'd sometimes just hold his hand and cry, but she had hope. Little did she know that he couldn't actually hear anything she told him. His senses by now were dead to the world. Don't say that. It's true. Don't tell me that. Aren't you going to finish the story? Do you want me to? I need you to. I need you to. I need you to. I don't know how the story ends yet. I don't know how the story ends yet. I don't want it to end yet. I don't want it to end yet. But all stories have to end someday. Is that the moral of the story? That it all ends? It isn't. I've learned. You lie still in the early morning, and you feel like you're floating. It's that time that you can know the hour and the minute without having to see a clock. The room is oddly not cold. It's very dark, but oddly not dark. There's something in the room with you that you can sense the presence of, but you're oddly not scared. It's oddly nothing to... Old House Experience by Allie Faith. Hey, I really don't know much about talking in these types of places, but I really have to tell someone about this. This happened to me in 2010 when I was 12, and I just out of nowhere remembered this today, and I just need to say it. I've gone through life believing in the spiritual realm because I've always been in contact with that side of whatever the other dimension is to us, I guess. When I was younger, I used to see odd things that could consist of dark, shadowy figures or ones that looked of light, even in pure darkness. You know when there's a malicious presence anyways, don't you? You ever get a sick, uncomfortable feeling spontaneously? Like the rush of a cold existence is occupying your space? Yeah, that's it. First, let me tell you who I am and why this actually freaks me out so much. Before I can remember, my father left me, my mom, and my 2 other siblings before I really remember much, only faint memories. My mom moved on after a while to my stepdad, who is very much like my dad now. The best way he knows how, that is. And I'm not going to get into my school life because that would literally make anyone feel like fighting little kids, and for your own sake, I won't do that to you, even though they all are of legal age now. Let's just get back to what I was saying before. Now, after my mom and dad got married, we moved into his house, and everything in my life started changing at home. I didn't sleep the same, I didn't eat the same. Everything about me just felt drained all the time and almost uncomfortable. Before I moved into his house, I was not afraid of the dark, and every dark thing that lurked in the shadows made it almost impossible for me to like the dark. The trailer was scary to begin with. It had brittle bones and looked like if I landed hard enough on the floor from jumping around, I would fall through or something. The walls were covered in a film of dust that made it hard to know the walls were actually white underneath and not a dark gray. It was really a disgusting place, but after moving around a few times, I guess it was my disgusting place to call home. My dad was a very corrupt guy who really didn't care about anyone but himself, and the only way he knew how to show love was to spend it on things you thought you wanted, and then go on about hurting some other person's family in so many ways I cannot even explain. Let's just say that blood is on his hands. I was so confused about all the things that I've seen until I did a lot of research on it. What he had in his house was a lot of spiritual vortexes. These things would show up clearly at night when I was supposed to be asleep and illuminated my whole house with colors that I can't even explain going around each other, fading in and out at once. I'm the youngest and the smallest of all my siblings, and so when my dad was up at night, also afraid of the dark, I would have to creep around him to not get caught. There was one dark figure that always seemed to move about the house and kind of stalk my dad, and sometimes was even going in and out of him. This thing I call a demon, even though there are so many variations of them that I can't tell you exactly what kind it is. That thing would scare me because when we would go out anywhere, it would follow us. And what's funny was later I was told that I was not the only one who had seen it, just the only one who had sight of it all the time. This thing, over time, got more and more violent, and so did my dad. He would swear at me and fight my mom and try to fight my older sister, who was 4 years older than me. He became scary and destructive. I watched that dark spirit turn my dad into a complete stranger. My mom desperately tried to find other places where we could live because of how he became possessed and literally looked the part, with extremely sunken eyes and body contorted this way and that, while he cried on the floor in pain for us to call 911. Every single time we called, and every time nothing changed, he became an empty shell, short of death. In the few months that followed before we moved out, he was watching movies and fell asleep on his couch. A lady woke me up and told me that I needed to get my dad up immediately because he was in danger. I didn't question her, and I should have. I should have questioned the fact that I was able to see her like a light was on when it wasn't, or why some random woman was in my house, but I felt the urge of what she was saying. I walked through the house and saw my dad through the kitchen on our big cheap family room couch as I kept a steady pace as I worked my way to my seemingly safe dad, and then it happened. He started screaming really loudly as I got up to 5 feet away from him, and I ran the rest of the way. I woke him up immediately, and I felt a wave of anxiety come over me as I saw his angry dark figure, or pet demon thing, come out angrily as my dad stared at me with frightened eyes. Then, as it looked like it was coming at me, my mom came running out of the bedroom with a crazy look on her face. I have never seen her run so fast in my life, and she asked if everything was okay. We both said we were, as we looked around to see nothing there. I figured that things are more free to linger in your subconscious mind as you sleep, and now that he was fully awake, my dad was okay, and thankfully so was I, at least for a little while. There was something odd about the situation though. My parents' room and the living room were wall to wall with each other, and my mom pulled me aside when she got to us. She asked me if I was talking to my dad because she heard a female voice talking to him, and she was listening the whole time to try to understand. She had been up too. I told her that I was walking to wake him up and had to run to him when he started screaming. I don't know too much about these dark figures, but I wonder who is really attached to him. To be honest, I should probably say, who is my dad? Who is he really? The Faceless Assassin by Sam Bentima. Hello. My name is Samuel. I've never actually posted anything here before, but I wanted to give it a try. The reason I'm here is because of a thread I recently found on a deep web website. The thread spoke of a man, or more like a thing, that went around under the name The Faceless Assassin. At first, I didn't know why it was called this, but after I did some research, I found out that its name referred to its way of killing its victims. It will all become clear after I've explained, so sit tight. Apparently, this assassin of some sorts is able to tap from your mind. You tell it who from your past you want dead, and then it looks into your soul. It will look at mutual friends you have. It will look at feuds or laughs you and the other person had. It will simply siphon all the memories and data it can find of that person out of you. After that, the hunt is on. From now on, the creature can change into everyone it saw in your mind. By changing into friends, family, or colleagues, the assassin comes close to its target very easily, setting up for a clean and easy kill. One doesn't pay this assassin with money. You paid it with the part of your mind you gave up in order for it to track down the person you want it to kill. Even though you assigned the creature to kill the person you wanted dead, you won't remember that you even knew that person. When their death report hits the news, you'll brush it off as another one of those cliché killings. Some people see this creature as a god. Others see it as a demon. Everywhere on the deep web I found people worshipping this being, seeing it as their savior or as their harbinger. Whatever it isn't human. There have been reports of this creature dating all the way back to the Roman Empire. Some say the murder of Julius Caesar was committed by this creature, that it took form of Caesar's best friend Brutus and rallied the council members to rise up and kill Caesar when he entered the room. Only few people have reported to have seen this creature with its own face. All those reports speak of a humanoid creature, but its silhouette seems off. Upon closer inspection, you will realize that the creature has no torso and that its legs run up to its neck. The creature's face is a black void. Some say that when they stared into it, they slowly started to forget who they were. When bargaining with the creature, it wears your own face. This creature has probably been around forever and has collected a lot of faces, and yet, out of all those faces, it chooses your own. Nobody knows why it does that. Nobody knows how it obtained your face. Some say it only appears to the ones he owns the face of. Others believe as soon as it lays its gaze on you, it already starts siphoning your thoughts, and it will only stop when you either go insane or die. Anyway, it isn't a creature you'd want to come by, but why am I making a post about this on a website like this? You may ask. Well, one of my friends has been acting a bit strange lately. Internet by Dear Midsworthy. Alan had just got new internet, and he and his wife loved it. He had always had terrible internet, and so never before truly used it. Every day, he discovered a new thing online. The other day, he learned how to shop online. To most people, this would seem weird, but Alan was coming up to 60 years old, and he had yet to truly experience the internet. Then it started. His wife, Abby, began to Skype his brother Mark nearly every day. The first time it happened, he walked in on his wife having a conversation with him. He joined in on the Skype call and talked with him for nearly an hour afterwards. After this, however, things began to change. Abby would lock herself in their bedroom with their laptop for hours talking to Mark. This happened for a month, and Alan knew what was going on. His wife was having an affair. He knew he had to punish them. One day he got his gun and followed his wife to work. He was not surprised to see her pull into his brother's driveway. She knocked on the door, and her brother answered the door topless. He hugged her, and she walked in. Seeing all this fueled a rage in Alan he'd never felt before. He stormed out of the car with his handgun and banged on the door. His brother, still topless, answered the door with a smile. He didn't register that he was about to die. Alan aimed the gun, closed his eyes, and fired. He felt warm blood splash against his face. He stepped over his brother's body into the living room where his wife was screaming and cowering in the corner. He aimed and fired, then fired again, and again, and again until his wife was an unrecognizable mess on the floor. He sighed and wiped the blood from the laptop on the coffee table to see what they'd emailed to one another. His stomach dropped. The screen showed plans for a surprise birthday party. His surprise party. Abby had been planning this for a month with his brother. It was going to have been huge. He dropped to his knees, screaming and crying for his wife to come back to him. He had just murdered his wife and brother. He wanted to cradle his wife's remains and undo all of this. Then, he stood up and pointed the gun to his head. He felt only pure guilt and sadness. He looked at his wife's remains and pulled the trigger. Well guys, there you have it. 10 creepypastas submitted to me by some of my wonderful subscribers. I hope you enjoyed the stories. I enjoyed narrating them and found them to be pretty interesting. Sorry, this video kind of took me a while to get out. It's been quite a bit of work getting all this done. I've had to record in several different sessions to find the time and the quietness needed in order to get this done. But I have quite a good backlog of material ready to go that I will be getting up soon after this. So thank you guys again, especially those of you that are listening to this and actually completed the entire video. You're amazing, and I will see you soon.